So our speaker this week is Ms. Sovaida Ma'ani Ewing, and her topic is why the Baha'i concept of religious law is revolutionary. Sovaida Ma'ani Ewing is a prolific author, speaker, and international lawyer with 20 years of experience in public and private legal practice. She and her mother, Baharieh Rouhani Maani, are co-authors of the book Laws of the Kitab-i-Aqdas. Sovaida is also the founding director of the Center for Peace and Global Governance, a virtual think tank and online forum that pools and proposes principled solutions to pressing global challenges. She has published 5 books in the area of peace and global governance, including Building a World Federation, The Key to Resolving Our Global Crises, and her latest, which is The Alchemy of Peace, 6 Shifts in Mindsets and Habits to Achieve World Peace. She also hosts a video podcast, Reimagining Our World, on the CPGG YouTube channel that is dedicated to creating a vision of the world we want and infusing hope that we can make the choices necessary to attain it. Sovaida is a lifelong Baha'i and has served on many Baha'i institutions, including the Baha'i Justice Society. She currently serves on the board of the Interfaith Council of Washington Metropolitan Area and the Board of Citizens for Global Solutions. And with that, I'll hand it off to Ms. Ma'ani Ewing.
Lovely to be with you. Thank you for the gracious introduction. It's all fun and games with technology today, with the CrowdStrike event and the internet going down around the world. It's been messing with Zoom as well, so you'll forgive us as we if we have some glitches. I'm going to try sharing my screen. All right. Well, hello everyone again. Thank you for your patience. So today we're going to talk about why the concept of religious law is revolutionary from a Baha'i perspective. Let's just dive in. So laws are generally viewed as onerous burdens. When we think about law, that's what we normally think of. It's an onerous burden inflicted on us. It's an arbitrary restraint on our freedom. And it's the reason why human beings are constantly searching for loopholes in the law. We know this with our taxes, right? We want to pay the minimal amount of tax, so we hire an attorney to figure out what the loopholes are, whereby we can pay taxes but not pay the government too much and save as much for ourselves. And we have this notion that we want to obey the letter of the law, but we're not necessarily interested in obeying the spirit of the law, which is why we end up bending the law. We always say, well, I'm bending it, but I'm not breaking it. So these are kind of terms we hear in our secular environment, and it leads to hair-splitting arguments, which is why lawyers like myself are kept in business, because that's what we spend our days and hours doing. It's unfortunate, kind of a misspent way of dealing with life. Now, this attitude towards law, I just want to point out, seems to be a universal one. It's not confined to us here in the United States. I was just reading a wonderful book by an author called Rohinton Mistry, an Indian author, called The Fine Balance. It's set in India during the days of the emergency law under Indira Gandhi. And anyway, a group of beggars who've been shunted off the streets under this emergency law, one of them comes back and says to another, maybe the emergency law has been canceled because it looks like the police are no longer around. And one of the characters, the beggar master, says, no, it hasn't, but it's become a game like all other laws. Easy to play once you know the rules. So that really captures this maladaptive approach to law. Unfortunately, we have this same maladaptive reaction when it comes to religious law. With the coming of Baha'u'llah, who, for those of you who may be new to the Baha'i faith, is the latest in a series of progressive and continuous revelators, a new set of laws has been revealed in a book of his called The Most Holy Book, in Arabic, Kitab-i-Aqdas, which is the repository of laws of God for this age, so the Baha'is believe. We believe that these laws are destined to endure and serve humanity's well-being for no less than 1,000 years. It's regarded as the mother book of Baha'u'llah's revelation, his most holy book, and the charter of a future world civilization which is to come. So when you think about these descriptors of the Baha'i Book of Laws, they're very weighty, and soon we'll understand why. So what makes the revelation of Baha'i law so unique and truly fascinating is that for the first time in the annals of religion, humanity is invited to consider the role and purpose of law in a new light, an understanding that befits us as we are evolving towards spiritual maturity and find ourselves at this particular stage in our collective development. Now, I want to start our conversation by first establishing a framework within which we can understand the unique perspective of Baha'i law. Now, there are going to be several overarching principles that I'm going to share with you, and then we're going to dive deeper into the specifics of the ways in which Baha'i law is revolutionary. But in order to understand it, we still first have to consider these overarching principles. The first overarching principle is that human beings have a dual nature, both a physical one and a spiritual one. Now, what's interesting is that both exist in us and they're integral parts of a whole. So it isn't one or the other, it's both. We each have both of these natures. Here is a wonderful quotation from the Baha'i writings that says that in man there are two natures, a spiritual higher or lower. In one, we approach God. In the other, we live for the world alone. You see this on your screen. Both are to be found in men. In his material aspect, man expresses untruth, cruelty, and injustice. These are all the outcome of our lower nature. So what we see going on in the world today, the wars and so on, these are all expressions of man's and woman's, humanity's lower nature. The attributes of the divine nature are shown forth in love, mercy, kindness, truth, and justice. These are all expressions of our higher nature. Now, this is the bottom line. If our divine nature dominates our human nature, we have a saint. When we talk about saints, this, according to the Baha'i writings, is what we're talking about. And on the contrary, if we reject the things of God and allow our evil passions to conquer, then we're no better than animals. So essentially, the fundamental question for each of us to be asking on a day-to-day basis is, do I want to aspire to be a saint, or do I want to aspire to be an animal? Usually it doesn't require much aspiration. It just means letting go and doing the thing that comes most easily to us. Now, so this was the first overarching principle. The second overarching principle is that just as there are physical laws that govern our lives, so too are there spiritual laws that govern us. So we know in the physical world we have gravity, which is a law we can't deny. I mean, we could deny it. We could say, I choose not to believe in it, but it would operate on us whether we chose to believe it or not. So if we tried to fly an airplane and didn't take into account the law of gravity, we would be in trouble. We have to sleep enough, we have to eat enough and get the proper kinds of food, and we have to move our bodies around enough, get enough exercise. These are like some of the basics that demonstrate the physical part of our lives. And if we want to have healthy lives, we have to make sure we can't just eat sugar all day. We'll develop diabetes, and then from the diabetes will flow a whole bunch of other diseases. We saw this during COVID. People who had diabetes were much more susceptible to getting COVID, and once getting COVID, to dying. So these all become systemic diseases in the body of in our body, in our spiritual body, and in the body of humanity. So this applies to the spiritual realm too. If we fail to A, identify what the spiritual laws are, and B, to actually follow them once we know them, we will become spiritually ill, and it will have an impact not only on our individual lives, but on the lives of the life of society as a whole. So one of the things, for example, that we do, and many faiths do this, but we definitely do this in the Baha'i faith, is there's an obligatory prayer that is to be said by each mature Baha'i over the age of 15, at least once a day. So the purpose of this saying of this prayer and of reading the writings, even if it's a short paragraph in the mornings, is to align ourselves with the will of the Creator, to basically align ourselves, for those who may not believe in God, with this universal consciousness to which we all have access. Now, a corollary of this these first overarching principles is this other thing, that we have to be really careful not to fall into a trap that we tend to fall into, which is that we apply the laws of the animal world to the human world. And this is really problematic because we are not mere animals. We started off by saying one of the overarching principles was that we have a dual nature. And our whole quest in life is to have the spiritual nature dominate the physical nature. If we were to fall into the trap of applying the laws of the animal world to the human, then we just make sure that we are enslaving ourselves to our animal nature and will never be able to rise above it. So think about some of our unique powers as these beings that are possessed of a dual nature. So part of our spiritual nature is the power of reflection, the power of imagination, of discernment, of free will, the power of creative thought and action that enable us to harness the laws of nature and to bend them to our will. So here we are, we're able to think of, conceive of, and then invent submarines and then actually build them and stay under the ocean for weeks at a time, even though we weren't created to do that. So a dog and a cat and a horse can't do that. They're bound by the laws of nature. We can harness those laws and bend them to our will. Same with airplanes. I'm amazed every time I get into an airplane, I think, wow, I'm flying in a hunk of very, very, very heavy metal with all these heavy, heavy people, with all this luggage, and yet we're soaring through the air in defiance of the law of gravity. And we're going for vast distances. It really is amazing what human beings are capable of because we have this dual nature. Now, I recently saw a documentary that beautifully illustrates this question, this issue that we are more than animals, that we have amazing abilities. So the Indian villages, and I don't know why, this is two examples now set in India. This was not intentional, but I'm just realizing it now. The Indian villagers in the Ladakh Valley in India were faced with dwindling water supplies because the snow cover on the mountains was dwindling because of climate change. And they realized that come summer they were going to run out of water to both to drink and to use, but also water for agriculture. And so they had collected together and consulted and come up with a very creative and ambitious project, which everybody told them in all the surrounding villages told them, you're never going to be able to do this. This is crazy. So the idea was for them to build a stupa, a 90-foot stupa, by piping water from the high mountains during the winter using gravity, and then pushing it through a metal pipe, a bend in a metal pipe to create a sprinkler. So they show, there was a whole documentary on this. They show this stupa with a metal pipe rising up, and they managed to force the water up through this metal pipe, and it sprinkles water around. Now, around this metal pipe, they create this stupa. They bring branches of trees and they start stacking them on each other. And what happens is when the water sprinkles on the branches, in that freezing cold air, it solidifies and turns into ice, right? And then they keep adding branches and then sprinkling more water, more ice, more branches, more ice, and this thing grows eventually to 90 feet. Now, at some point, they hit a snag, just like we did today, where the water inside the central tube that is now encrusted and surrounded by frozen ice, the water inside the pipe froze, so they couldn't continue the sprinkling effect. And so they came up with this amazing low-tech solution. They used a pressure cooker, and they showed these guys bring this pressure cooker, boil the water, turn it on, and put it at the end of the pipe where they had access to unfreeze the water along the pipe so that they could continue this process. Anyway, when all was said and done, you saw this 90-foot stupa, and they climbed on top of it, and they had all these beautiful festive flags flying. And then once the summer came and the sun came out, the sun started to melt this ice, and this melting ice water was the source of their water for their agriculture and for their needs. At that point, once they demonstrated that it was possible, then all the naysayers in the surrounding villages came running and said, "We want one too. Will you come do it for us?" And they said, "You can do it yourself. We're happy to tell you how, but if we could do it, you could do it." I just thought this was a beautiful example of the creativity and this higher nature of human beings, the ability to reflect and create and imagine and so on. Okay, and consult. The animals don't consult with each other, but we can and do, and we come up with great ideas. Now, the third overarching principle is that divine law or religious law, however you want to think of it, must be considered in the context of an eternal life, rather than what we tend to do, which is consider this law in the context of the limited span of time that we have on this earth. And so we end up with comments like, "Gee, well, that's not fair that I should be deprived of following my inclinations and just being happy for the 80, 90 odd years I'm here. That's not fair. And I want to be able to do what I want to be able to do." When we consider that we have an eternal life and that the life 80, 90, 100 years we have here, if we're lucky, are really an infinitesimal blob in the scheme of an eternal life, then, and the purpose of that eternal life, which we'll come to in a couple of minutes, then our calculations may change. And we may be willing to make what we otherwise seem like huge sacrifices and suffer deprivations for the benefits that we deem we can get. So to put it kind of crudely, short-term pain for long-term gain. All right, so these are some of the overarching principles that I'd like us to keep in the back of our minds before we dive into why the concept of Baha'i law is revolutionary. Now, we begin with the idea that there is a strong nexus between divine law and the purpose of all religion, all divine revelation. So what is the purpose of religion? As Baha'is understand it, according to Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, the object, this is the quote, "the object of every revelation," so not just his, but every revelation, the Christian, the Muslim, the Buddhist, the Zoroastrian, and so on, is to effect a transformation in the whole character of mankind that shall manifest itself both outwardly and inwardly. So in our inner lives, the way we show up as human beings in our relations with each other in the world, but also in our external conditions outwardly. So the way our society functions, and definitely not the way our society is functioning right now with all the polarization and prejudice and corruption and lying and so on. This is the antithesis of what all religion calls us to be. Okay, now, the divine law is a critical tool for religion to achieve its purpose. So that's the next thought I want you to have in mind. Divine law is a critical tool for religion to arrive at its goal, which is the transformation inwardly and outwardly of individuals and society. Now, why is that so? It is because these are the purposes of law, divine law, in this dispensation, and the Baha'i dispensation is viewed by the Baha'is. So according to the governing body of the Baha'i Faith, the Universal House of Justice, they have identified 4 purposes of Baha'i law. And these are, these are mind-blowing. I've never seen anyone talk about law of any kind in these terms. So let's read them. To bring tranquility to human society. Secondly, to raise the standard of human behavior. Thirdly, to increase the range of human understanding. And fourthly, to spiritualize the life of each and all. Now, the Universal House of Justice says that the reason we have these laws is because they're destined to take us into a splendorous world civilization. And these are definitely not the ideas we associate with the function of law. So I'd like to leave you with this thought that what we're doing is, as Baha'is utilizing these laws, we're committing to a moral system that transcends any cultural heritage. So we are now rising above our limitations as human beings, the limitations of each of our cultures. All cultures have things that are ennobling and constructive, and all cultures have things that no longer serve us. So what happens with the coming of each revelation is that we get to step up and discard the things that do not serve us and maintain the things that do, and even more importantly, adopt visions of new things that we've never conceived of ourselves before that now will serve us. However, in order for this purpose of religion, which is the transformation inner and outward, to be achieved, it's necessary that we obey the law of God. So here's what's really interesting. Baha'is believe that our loving Creator entered into a covenant with us. We call the eternal covenant, the greater covenant. In it, the Creator says, I will never forsake you, and I will demonstrate my love for you by continually, during the course of your evolution over the centuries and millennia, send you a divine teacher to guide you to that which conduces to your well-being. But our part of the bargain is to recognize the divine teacher that is sent by the Creator, and secondly, to obey the teachings and the laws that are sent. And the teachings fall into their 2 categories of laws. One are spiritual laws that we also call spiritual teachings, and the other are social laws that change from time to time. Now, this dual obligation of recognizing the manifestation of God or the prophet of God, or these are all kind of synonyms, messenger of God for the day, and obeying him. These are twin duties that Baha'u'llah tells us are inseparable, and one can't be accepted without the other. This is in his Book of Laws. It's a really fascinating statement that is worth reflecting upon. Because it's really only when both are combined, recognition and obedience, that we get meaningful transformation in the individual, which then pervades the fabric of society and leads to the transformation of society. And so we get the purpose of religion being achieved, right? Transformation inner and outer. So now let's do a deeper dive and let's consider some of the very concrete ways in which obedience to the law transforms us as individuals and society and achieves the 4 purposes that the Universal House of Justice laid out. So this is now the meat of this presentation. The first thing that we get, the first amazing benefit we get through obedience to divine law is that we attain the knowledge of God. And you think, huh? How did you get from this to that? So let's trace the pathway. The Baha'i writings tell us that that when we recognize the prophet of God for the day and obey his laws, it leads us to, this is the quote, to ascend unto the station confer upon our inmost being, the station of the knowledge of our own selves. So the first thing that happens when we fulfill these twin duties as part of the eternal covenant is we get to know ourselves really well. You get to know yourself. I, Sovaida, get to know myself. So what's so great about that? Oh, what's great about it is that the Baha'i writings also tell us that once we've achieved the knowledge of self, that is the same as the comprehension of his own being here being the divine manifestation. So we're starting to trace this. Recognition and acceptance of the teachings of the manifestation of God lead to knowledge of self. Knowledge of self is the same as leads to the knowledge of the manifestation of God. And what's great about that, the next quote is that knowledge of the manifestation leads us to the knowledge of God. And then for those of you who are Baha'is, you'll know this. For others who don't, one of the short obligatory prayers that Baha'is have the option of saying every day is one that says, I bear witness, oh my God, that thou hast created me to do what? To know thee and to worship thee. It's a very simple line, an acknowledgement that this is the purpose of our creation. So this is a cardinal purpose of our creation, is the knowledge of God. So look at how we've traced that obedience to divine law is the pathway to attaining the knowledge of God, which is a cardinal purpose of our lives. I hope you're excited. You're getting excited because this is just one of a number of benefits we're going to talk about. All right, let's look at the next one. Obedience to the divine laws leads to our happiness. I don't know who among you doesn't want to be happy. I know I do, and I'm seeing a lot of literature out there about how to be happy in life. It's amazing. Like some of the top universities, especially Harvard and Stanford and so on, and Yale, they have classes on happiness. They have courses. They have some of like the top current gurus in the world on how to achieve happiness are these people who are studying it, which all it does is it highlights the desperation of our society, the number of people who feel that this is an elusive thing that they're seeking and are desperately wanting to find solutions and want somebody to tell them, do this, do that, do the other, and then we guarantee you at the end of the day, you will achieve happiness. But I guess the proof is in the pudding. Looking around us, I, for one, don't see very many truly joyful and happy people. So let's see whether this can help us. Obedience to the laws leading to happiness. Far from the law of God being what we described initially, a set of arbitrary and capricious rules by a stern creator to keep his creatures in check, or merely the means of preserving order. You know, we must have law and order, so therefore we must have rules. These divine laws are a means of assuring our well-being and happiness. Here's a quote again in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the book of laws, from Baha'u'llah. He says, think not that we have revealed unto you a mere code of laws. Do this, do that, don't do this, don't do that. That's a mere code of laws, the do's and don'ts. Nay, rather, we have unsealed the choice wine. People reach for wine when they want to relax and be happy. And wine with a capital W has been associated in Sufi philosophy and in mythology with connection with God and divine joy, basically. Always being at peace because you know that there's something far greater than the accidental experiences that you're going through in life, all of which will pass at the end of the day. So, what are we learning here? That upon the slightest reflection, we realize that we're limited by our own nature. If we reflect on ourselves, this is a conclusion we all should end up arriving at. And because we're limited by our own nature, it means we can't progress as individuals and improve either our individual or collective life in the way we wish, and that redounds to our benefit without having an external point of reference, something that transcends our understanding. we have to be humble enough to acknowledge this insufficiency in ourselves. We can't, as a wonderful a teacher of the faith says, we can't pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. There's a limit to what we can do. And so Baha'u'llah warns the Baha'is against losing the opportunity to obey the laws by saying, the second quote, keep ye the statutes and commandments of God, nay, regard them as ye would your very eyes, and be not of those who suffer grievous loss. And in a last quote that's not on your screen, he says, if you were to discover what I've desired for you in revealing the holy laws, you'd offer up your very souls for this sacred, this mighty, and most exalted faith. That one gives me goosebumps. Now, let's look at some examples, just very cursorily, just to give us a sense of happiness we achieve through obedience to Baha'i law, for instance. So in the Baha'i faith, we are forbidden from imbibing alcoholic beverages, unless prescribed by a doctor for health reasons. Now, society's flipped back and forth, and science has for many years. You know, we went from there's no problem with it to actually 10 years ago, like, oh, it's actually affirmatively good for you to drink, you know, a couple of glasses of wine a day. It's good for your heart. It's good for this. It's good for that. And now science seems to have caught up with Baha'u'llah's teachings. And the current understanding is that no amount of alcohol is not only is no amount good for anyone, but any amount of alcohol is bad for everyone, and particularly for women. Apparently there's something about our physiology and biology that makes alcohol particularly toxic to the female body. The research is all out there. I'm not a scientist, but I do read this stuff, and so I find it really interesting. So, for health reasons, obeying the law of abstaining from alcohol leads to our happiness because it means that we're going to stay healthy. I don't know if you've ever had a really bad condition, but being sick does not conduce to happiness by and large. Secondly, experts tell us, we learned this when we were raising our own offspring in school, that one of the greatest dangers to children in middle and high schools, definitely in the United States, is the poor judgment and the decisions they make under the influence of alcohol. So they start drinking alcohol very early. They experiment with it at 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. And one of the things they do is they then, when their inhibitions are lowered, they succumb to sexual activity before they're psychologically and emotionally equipped for it. And that action apparently has a deleterious effect on brain development, especially in girls. So, I mean, talk about things, and it leads us. So here's what a 2011 study showed, that for all adolescents, both girls and boys, embarking on a sexual activity during adolescence affects mood and brain development into adulthood and leads to higher episodes of depressive behavior and anxiety. I mean, honestly, I mean, it's taken a lot of scientific and social science research to figure this out, but that's the beauty of revelation. If we believe that Baha'u'llah is who he claims, which is the divine physician who has his fingers on the pulse of humanity, and that what he's revealed to us is not just a mere do's and don'ts code of law, but something that conduces to our happiness, we start to see this. Teenage pregnancy is another horrific outcome of, you know, being sexually active before marriage, but definitely is under the influence of alcohol when we might engage in behaviors we might not normally engage in. And then think about how those pregnancies decimate the lives of the mothers, the children who now end up with parents who are not equipped emotionally or psychologically to be parents. The mother's life usually is, you know, that's the end of her life in the sense of not being able to pursue her education or fulfill her potential. And then, of course, the poor parents of the teenage mother are dragged into it, and they now have to put their lives on hold in order to accommodate this. So the last example I'll give on alcohol is something, again, from our personal experience. The father of a friend of our daughter's, lovely, lovely man. We read about an article about him in the paper a few years later. He had been drunk, driving. He accidentally hit somebody and then continued driving because he wasn't compos mentis, ended up in jail. So his poor daughter ended up being shunted from family member to family member. And what a tragedy that could have easily been avoided. All right, the third benefit from obedience to laws is that it deepens our relationship with God and helps us fulfill our spiritual destiny. Remember purposes 3 and 4 that the Universal House of Justice indicated, that the laws increase the range of human understanding and spiritualize the life of each and all. This is one of my favorites here. One of the fundamental verities of the Baha'i faith is that the purpose of our lives on this planet and our time here is to prepare ourselves for the afterlife, for many worlds of God. By doing what? By acquiring what are referred to as essential spiritual limbs that we need to progress in all the other worlds of God. And the analogy that's given is that of the fetus in the womb of the mother. So just as the job of the fetus in the womb of the mother for 9 months is to develop limbs and organs and systems like the nervous system, so that once it's born into this world, it is equipped to function properly. So too, our only job really in this life, or one of 2 key jobs, is to develop qualities which constitute the spiritual limbs that are necessary for us not to be born handicapped, to put it bluntly, once we die, so that we can benefit as much as possible from what the future worlds of God have to offer us. And the Baha'i notion, by the way, being that the soul comes into being at conception and starts on an eternal journey towards its creator. Remember, one of our overarching principles was that we have to consider laws in the context of an eternal life. Now you understand why. Now, the divine qualities include things like sanctity, radiance, spirituality, faith, assurance, knowledge of God. So remember, the first benefit from obeying laws is that we attain the knowledge of God. Well, that's one of the fundamental spiritual limbs we also need for our eternal journey. So you start to see how these 4 purposes delineated by the Universal House of Justice are all achieved. Illumination, detachment, perseverance, patience, self-sacrifice. We need a lifetime to hone some of these qualities. By the way, the Baha'i writings say that unless man acquires these forces, so these virtues also being described as forces, and attains to these requirements, he will surely be deprived of the life that is eternal. That's one of those quotes that makes me sit up and pay attention. So in the light of what we've just said, it's apparent that the revelation of a set of laws, far from being a set of do's and don'ts, is actually an act of mercy and kindness on the part of a creator, our creator, and an expression of that creator's profound and infinite love for us. There's a beautiful Baha'i prayer in which there's a line that says, as we're praying to God, "Thou art more friend to me than I am to myself." This is the Creator being more friend to us than we are to ourselves, knowing in advance, because the Creator has the foresight that we lack to see what actually conduces to our happiness in the long run, as opposed to the temporary happiness we get from doing something that we really want to do in the moment. So how so, Sovaida? Why are you saying that God's revelation of laws is an expression of infinite love? Well, because the Creator knows our natural propensity towards inertia and laziness. And so out of the Creator's love, he or she has couched in the language of laws and directives certain behavior that is necessary for us to do in order to develop the spiritual limbs we need for the afterlife, because the Creator doesn't want us to live this life and be born into the next handicapped. Were it not for the pressure of these laws, so laws do exert some pressure because it is you have to do this. This is not an optional thing, and you must not do that. So if it weren't for the pressure of these laws, we would probably rest on our laurels and fail to develop our spiritual limbs and thereby hinder our own progress in the worlds of God. This is why this is an act of profound love and kindness. Because ultimately, there are two conditions once we leave this world. I'll read you this quote from Baha'u'llah. If the soul be faithful to God, it will reflect his light and will eventually return to him. If it fails, however, in its allegiance to its Creator, it will become a victim to self and passion. I want this, I want this, I want this, I want this. Self and passion, I know best, and will in the end sink in its depths. The depths of what? Self and passion. I want to add a note here. Baha'is do not believe or subscribe to a notion of heaven and hell. Heaven and hell are not places that we go to. I mean, there isn't a God who sits at the end of our lives and says, you good, you go to heaven, you bad, you go to hell, or you go to limbo. It's a cause and effect thing. Our actions determine how well our soul can progress. It's like if you smoke, you are going to determine how well your lungs function. If you smoke, the lungs are going to be hampered and may eventually develop emphysema and even cancer. If you don't smoke, at least you have a chance of having healthy lungs. So God isn't punishing us when we get emphysema. It's our own actions that have led to certain results. And the same when we go to the afterlife and our soul is hindered in its progress, it's not because God's punishing us. It's because we failed to do what we needed to do here, develop certain essential spiritual limbs. And now, we get to regret it at leisure, so to speak. Okay. I want to pause a moment and highlight one of the virtues that we're called upon to develop in this life, because I find it interesting and it relates very closely to obedience to divine law. It's the virtue of constancy, firmness in this covenant, firmness, having a strong faith. And it's defined in the Baha'i writings as when we recognize that the Creator shall not be asked of his doings. That is the highest state of constancy. Baha'u'llah says, whenever my laws appear like the sun in the heaven of divine utterance, they must be faithfully obeyed by all, though my decree be such as to cause the heaven of every religion to be cleft asunder. He doeth what he pleaseth. Speaking of God, he chooseth, and none may question his choice. And then he adds in another passage, were God basically to decree as lawful the thing which from time immemorial had been forbidden, and forbid that which had at all times been regarded as lawful, to none is given the right to question his authority. Why? Because he is the Creator. He's not just some other dude, as we say in America, some guy. It is our Creator. It's our loving Creator, and has told us this is what conduces to our well-being. Okay. We need to adjust our expectations. Obedience to laws is not easy. Can we say we all agree on that? It's not easy. Nobody said it was going to be easy. So we can't expect it to be. But it is not, the obedience we're called to is not a blind obedience. It is a very intelligent obedience because it comes after we've done two things. First, we have to take the initial steps of investigating truth for ourselves. Once we have come to the conclusion that Baha'u'llah is who he says he is, the mouthpiece of God for today, then the second thing we also do is that we voluntarily exercise our free will and make a choice to follow his authority. So this is not blind. It's like being sick and recognizing, oh, I'm so sick, I now need surgery. So what do? We go and investigate and we find a surgeon who is equipped and qualified, the best surgeon possible. We do all our investigation. We talk to people who have done surgeries with the surgeon. We go look up their qualifications. We interview them. We consult with their peers. But once we've decided this is the surgeon for me, we don't then second guess. I mean, once we're on that table and the anesthetics are being applied, we don't say, well, hold on a second, let me look at that scalpel. Is that the right size? And whoa, wait a minute, what are you doing there? No, at some point, you got to be willing to actually submit because we've done our homework in advance. So it is an intelligent obedience. Life is a messy business. This is the other thing that we need to understand, and it really helps in dealing with the difficulty of obeying divine laws. It helps to understand something that the Baha'i writings tell us, that this life is not an art gallery, but the workshop. For those of you who paint or do any kind of art, you know the difference. You know how messy things are in the studio and the workshop. You throw a canvas up and you throw paint on it and you try things and you think, oh, scrap this, this is awful. And you put something else up and you rework stuff and there's paint splattered everywhere and your clothes are dirty and there's stuff on the walls. It's not a pristine it's not a pristine job. The art gallery, once everything is perfected, is different. You walk into a museum and everything is pristine. We're told in the Baha'i writings that the next world is the art gallery. So here we can just focus and accept the fact that things are going to be messy and it's okay. And we're going to make mistakes and that's okay, as long as we don't give up the struggle. The problem is sometimes we, as human beings, we bump up against a law that's difficult for us, understandably, and then we throw our hands up and we give up and we say, oh, who cares? I mean, I might as well just do whatever I want. I'm a failure anyway. And that's like taking the completely wrong lesson. The other thing to accept is that obedience requires daily discipline and hard work. So this is another analogy now. We've moved from an art gallery to a gym, working out. The only way to work out our muscles is by breaking them down, by pushing hard against gravity. If we let gravity take over, our muscles just relax and disappear on us, right? Especially after age 35, we lose, 3% of muscle a year? So now you got to work hard just to not lose it, forget about gaining any. So we got to daily work out. And we said we have a dual nature, physical and spiritual. So if we have to work out for our muscles, we also have to work out to maintain spiritual discipline in order to maintain our spiritual health, just to maintain it. And what we actually want to do is grow and acquire these spiritual virtues that will take us through all the worlds of God, right? So imagine now the amount of discipline and hard work that is necessary, because life is a series of tests and achievements. We try hard. You can lift a 2-pound weight for a while, and then you break through and you can lift a 4-pound weight and a 5-pound weight, and you gradually go up. But not if we don't work out on a regular basis. And the last thing to consider under this heading is that our job in this life, again, is to prepare our soul for the next by developing certain virtues. Here, according to the writings, and here's the quote, I put it up because this is such an important one. We must learn to control and direct our animal impulses. There we are again, back to the word animal. This is part of our dual nature. Yes, we have an animal nature, and it's going to try and dominate if we don't work against it and have the spiritual dominate. How do we do it? By controlling and directing our animal impulses. Life in this world is a succession of tests and achievements, just like school. You have to pass first grade tests to get into second grade and so on. Of falling short and of making new spiritual advances. Now, it's not enough to merely obey the laws. We're also called upon to do it full-heartedly and with radiance. The spirit in which we obey a law is as important as the fact of obeying it. And there are two phrases used in the Baha'i writings that I've put up here on the slide for you, which I love. Radiant acquiescence, which is the standard we're called to, versus dull resignation. When I think of dull resignation, I think of that 5-year-old who pouts when mother or father says you have to do this. Oh, okay, fine. You know, I know I must, I haven't a choice. But that's not the spirit in which we're asked to obey Baha'i law. We are asked to obey it in a spirit of radiant acquiescence. I wholeheartedly accept. Why? Because even though I may not understand in the moment with respect to this law, why it's good for me, I have faith and trust that my loving Creator has crafted a series of law out of his or her profound love for me that redound to my benefit in this life and the next. The fourth benefit from obedience to the laws is that it has a beneficial impact not just on me and you as individuals, but on society. And remember, the first two purposes articulated by the Universal House of Justice were bringing tranquility to human society and raising the standard of human behavior. So we see that. There's a story of a wonderful figure in the Baha'i faith who was a spiritually evolved human being, part of a category of people known as Hands of the Cause. His name was Enoch Olinga, from Africa, from Uganda. I knew him as a child. He was just the essence of, 100-watt light bulb, essence of love and joy and radiance. And oh my gosh, I just thinking of him puts a smile on my face. Anyway, this amazing human being had, before he became a Baha'i, had been dismissed from his government job for being an alcoholic and was known in his village for being an alcoholic. But once he embraced the Baha'i faith, he immediately gave up alcohol because it's one of the divine laws, one of Baha'u'llah's laws, abstinence from alcohol. When the people in his hometown heard that Enoch had given up alcohol, they said, we want to investigate this faith that he has embraced. If it has had this kind of effect on this man who was such an alcoholic, this faith is capable of an amazing transformation, and we want to understand, we want to learn what that is. Isn't that amazing? So you think about the impact on society. They could see the deleterious impact that the drinking had had before, and now the transformation that was wrought in an individual that now was leading to transformation of a hometown because their curiosity had been aroused and they were now wanting to investigate the truth for themselves. Another example, we are forbidden to backbite in the Baha'i faith. So backbiting is if you have fresh water, like our views of each other are pure, right? Until someone comes and drops one drop of poison in that water. It could be a huge vat of water, but one drop will ruin and contaminate all of the water. You can't drink any of it. So the poison of backbiting is actually likened by Baha'u'llah to murder, because he says you're assassinating character, and the assassination of character can often last generations. So we're forbidden from doing that because it creates disunity. So think about bringing tranquility to human society and raising the standard of human behavior. Forbidding us to engage in backbiting achieves those two purposes. And these are definitely not only individual purposes for us, but for society. Another example is the law of parental consent. So under Baha'i law, when a couple who are Baha'i want to get married, they have to seek the consent of parents and biological parents on both sides, even if there's divorce and so on. There are some exceptions, but they're very rare. I'm not going to go into that because that's not the purpose of today's presentation. But the purpose of this law is a societal purpose, to bring tranquility to humanity and raise the standard of behavior. Why? Because it builds unity, starting with the smallest building block of society, which is the family. If the two families can't be united, then it's very hard to build a unified community. The fabric, the quality of the bricks of that wall, they have to be strong. They can't be porous. So that's another example. Fifthly, the obedience to the law has the benefit that enable us to attain true freedom. Now, this is another one of those very meaty topics, the relationship between obedience to law and true freedom. We live, folks, in an age of rugged individualism and freedom, especially in the West. But this freedom, which has been taken to an extreme, has been distorted. And this distortion can be seen in all the extremist behaviors of our tribalism and nationalism and competition and permissiveness. I mean, we just get in crime and all of terrorism. These are all manifestations of the same thing of I get to do what I want to do because I want to do it. And I've decided and I'm the ultimate arbiter of what I do. End of story, right? But no. And what we've done is we've created a false dichotomy, which says that I either have absolute freedom or I obey. And we tend to oscillate wildly between freedom, absolute freedom to do anything we want at any time, and obedience. And we treat them as though they were mutually exclusive. Baha'u'llah has come to make them parts of one whole. They're both integral parts of one whole. We have to learn that if I did everything I wanted to do, just followed whatever my desires and passions were, it would lead to chaos. And it would definitely impinge on your rights and the rights of others in society. The Baha'i writings basically put it in this very stark way for us to understand. The first thing they tell us is that true freedom, the way that absolute freedom and the way we conceive of it, is only for the animals. Here is the quote, "Know ye that the embodiment of liberty," it's actually on your slide, and its symbol is the animal. We're back to this dual nature, animal and spiritual. "That which beseemeth man or human beings is submission unto such restraints as will do the following things: protect us from our own ignorance, guard us from the harm of the mischief maker." And then we're warned that this absolute freedom or liberty causes us to overstep the bounds of propriety and infringe on the dignity of our station and debase us to the level of extreme depravity and weakness. So on the one hand, we have all these warnings and this very clear delivery of a message that absolute freedom is only fit for animals. And we've already said that we have this dual nature. We are spiritual beings and we mustn't fall into the trap of applying the laws of the animal kingdom to the human kingdom. Then the Baha'i writings show us the other side. What is true liberty? Liberty, the liberty that profiteth you, says Baha'u'llah at the bottom of your screen here, is to be found nowhere except in complete servitude unto God, the eternal truth. So we're back to those twin duties of recognition of the manifestation and obedience to his teachings and laws. And there are a whole bunch of quotes. Another one, "True liberty consisteth in man's submission unto my commandments." Now, again, we have to understand that the truth that obedience in the Baha'i writing involves the exercise of free will. It's not an oppressive somebody sitting on our heads to obey. We don't have clergy. There's nobody who's checking up on us to see if we're obeying the laws. It is between us and our Creator, free exercise of the will. So it's an intelligent, open-eyed obedience. Okay, the last really interesting, meaty topic is the relationship between ego and obedience. The biggest obstacle to us benefiting from divine law in all the ways that we've explored is our ego. It's that little voice in us that says, I know best, and that it is described in the Baha'i writings as the insistent self. In Farsi and Arabic, it's nafs ammare, this insistent self, constantly insisting on having its way. Essentially, what we need to do is recognize, to admit that our creator is our creator. It's not like us. And we're just a teeny tiny part of this creator's creation. And that really we should be exercising our free will to surrender to the authority of this creator and align our will with his, so that we can then become part of all the forces within the universe that are moving it to its destiny. When we struggle with a particular law because we don't like it or because it's hard for us, it's good to remind ourselves that all that's happening is that our understanding hasn't grown sufficiently. That's all it is. And we need to keep investigating truth, but keep obeying and have faith, A, that the loving creator is doing what's in our best interest, but B, that over time we also pray to maybe understand, if not in this world, then in the next, the wisdom of having to obey a particular law that may require us to sacrifice something that we hold very dear to us. So the problem with ego, and this is another analogy from Abdu'l-Baha, he says, ego is like adding a drop of vinegar to a vat of milk. It spoils it, right? So he says the milk is like the pure heart again. And when the ego steps in, this insistent self, it's like putting a drop of vinegar in there. And then that's it. So what we're called upon to do in the Baha'i writings is to be ever vigilant about the ego. Shoghi Effendi, who is the second authorized interpreter of the Baha'i writings and what we call the guardian of the Baha'i faith, who was the head of the faith after Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha, who was Abdu'l-Baha being Baha'u'llah's eldest son, he says this: life is a constant struggle, not only against the forces around us, but above all against our own ego. We can never afford to rest our oars. You know, if you're on a river and you're rowing, you can't rest your oars, for if we do, we soon see ourselves carried down the stream again. It's the corollary to the analogy about working out. You can't, it's got to be daily, regular discipline, otherwise the muscles go, right? So this is another analogy, rowing on a fast-moving river, which is our world, that's taking us in the wrong direction. The Universal House of Justice says this. I want to add this. This quote is not up here, but I want to read it. It says, the ego is the animal in us. We're back to this analogy of this dual nature of animal and spiritual. The ego is the animal in us, the heritage of the flesh, which is full of selfish desires. By obeying the laws of God, seeking to live the life laid down in our teachings, along with prayer and struggle. So again, it's the struggle, not giving up. We can subdue our egos. We call people saints who have achieved the highest degree of mastery over their ego. That's all a saint is someone who has worked really hard, been very disciplined to have their higher self, their spiritual nature, dominate their lower self. Do Baha'is believe that we can be perfect? No. And here is this last quote. He says, the complete and entire elimination of the ego would imply perfection, which man can never completely attain. So forget that. But the ego can and should be ever increasingly subordinated to the enlightened soul of man. So it's a process. The last thing I want to do is I want to tell you that very high standard that Baha'is strive for. But it's really good to have high standard because you may aim for the stars, but as a poem says, you hit the barnyard door. But if you aimed for the barnyard door, your arrows would definitely go into the dust. So let's aim for the stars. Abdu'l-Baha had once told a group of New York Baha'is that in the future, the words I me, and mine would be regarded as profane, swear words. Wow. Something to reflect on in this age of selfies where we're constantly looking at ourselves and picturing ourselves, and it's all about me, 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 me. This is the food I'm eating. This is the place I'm at. This is what I did. This is the emotion I'm feeling. It's like, oh my goodness. We're all drowning in the sea of I's. It's very difficult. Here we go. I struggle with this myself. Eliminating the word I and mine seems almost impossible, but we strive. So, friends, the Baha'i laws in toto are a reflection of the coming of age of the individual in this new dispensation brought by Baha'u'llah. Why? Because these laws provide us with the opportunity to behave more with maturity, where we're coming out of a collective adolescence into maturity, where we exercise personal responsibility. We're not relying on parents to tell us what to do anymore, or for people in high school to tell us what to do. We go to college and now we're like, yep, I got to get up myself in the morning. I need to be self-directed. I need to get proper food and exercise and sleep and learn to treat other people properly and get my homework done and socialize and say my obligatory prayers and be part of a community and be in service. So personal responsibility, and there's no clergy to intervene, right? The second thing is that we get to exercise every day our spiritual muscles. So this daily discipline, these are both hallmarks of the fact that humanity is coming of age. In conclusion, the ultimate prize, which was the transformation of society. Remember that right from the start? To transform society both inwardly and outwardly. What is the roadmap? I've laid it out for you as I understand it. I am not a clergy, thank God, and I have no authority in the faith. I'm just an individual with some thoughts and reflections based on my own study of the Baha'i writings. Here's the roadmap. Submitting our egos to divinely ordained laws leads to divine justice. Divine justice is the indispensable foundation of peace, according to the Baha'i writings. It's impossible to have peace without divine justice, and events in the world lately have been showing that is so. You can't treat other people badly and then expect them to live with you peacefully. It's not going to happen. Once we achieve peace, we can then work on our unity, which is the hallmark of our maturity as a human race. And the kind of transformation of our society, which will lead to what Baha'is called a new world order, a universal civilization, and the kingdom of God on earth, which is something that the followers of all religions, especially the Christians, have been looking for, praying every day. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, right? The Lord's Prayer. And having done all of this, we fulfill the purpose of all revelation, and in this dispensation, Baha'u'llah's revelation, and demonstrates its efficacy, the purpose being the transformation in society, both in our individual lives and in societal life, so that we can create this new civilization. If you're interested in learning more about the laws of the Kitab-i-Aqdas and seeing how they basically carry this theme of oneness of religions, there was a book that my mother and I wrote a number of years ago called Laws of the Kitab-i-Aqdas that you can get on George Ronald Books' website, grbooks.com, that takes some of the past religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, the Bahá'í and Baha'i faiths, and shows the evolution of all the laws. And how, on the one hand, they show the oneness of religion, on the other hand, they show the progression that we're talking about in terms of continual and progressive revelation. Okay, I think I can stop sharing and I can see your lovely faces again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sovaida, for your talk. This is actually a topic I've been thinking about a lot recently, and I'm glad that you were able to talk on it, and definitely brought up a lot for me, so thank you. So yeah, now we can have time for questions. So if anyone has a question, they can put it in the chat. We already have one question that asks, What are some challenges that Baha'is face when trying to apply these laws in diverse cultural and legal environments around the world?
So diverse cultural. So let's remind ourselves, let's start with the cultural. We're trying to build a new civilization. Many people have asked different figures, central figures in the faith. Yes, they've complained. Oh, this is so hard. Society's going the complete opposite direction. What do we do? Our culture is different. So, as we said before, we are being called to a new moral system that is above, it's suprahuman. Let's put it that way. I'm never going to concede that your cultural heritage is better than mine, and vice versa, or anybody's. And none of us is going to give a chance for any of our cultural heritages to be tried out for any length of time to see whether it works for all of us. The only hope and prayer that we all have of coming together in unity is to have something that is above us, that is a point of reference, that is sent down by a divine source that can help us harmonize our differences. That is the function of true religion. It has the ability to harmonize our differences. We have to be humble enough to recognize, as we said before, that our cultures, all of our cultures have their deficiencies. It's no shame on any culture. And there are things we need to let go of for the collective benefit. Also, when you trace back some cultural mores and you look and see where they started, the roots come from the desire to oppress a particular group of people within society and to keep them under control. I'm just going to say, for example, female genital mutilation. It's a cultural norm in a bunch of societies. But we have to understand where it came from. Basically men trying to dominate women and keeping their women in check, making sure that they wouldn't stray. And then it became so embedded in the culture that everybody bought into it, including all the grandmothers and the mothers, because then a whole system grew up around it. If you wanted to have any prayer of getting married and having someone take care of you, then you had to demonstrate that you had been through this procedure and you were therefore pure and clean. I mean, these are all limiting beliefs and false assumptions that society's bought into. Every culture has this. I'm not singling out one culture. I'm just using this as an illustration. Every single culture has its set of limiting beliefs and false assumptions and things that we've all bought into without really independently investigating where it came from. So racism in this country, anti-Black racism, it's institutionalized. And when you start to study the history of this country and how even our Constitution was established and our institutions, you see that one of the goals was to keep property and money in the hands of a very small group of people, right? Men, white men from a certain background. And then an entire country grew up around this institutionalized system. So we have to be smart enough to understand this and say, okay, now that we understand it, we're not going to just keep whining about it. We're going to say, what can we now do differently to make sure that justice and fairness prevails and there's equal opportunity for everyone? In terms of legal difficulties, so Baha'is are told to obey the laws of the country that they reside in. So if there are certain laws that, if there's difficulty with certain laws, then that is something that you should go to your governing Baha'i institutions and consult with them about. So for instance, in the realm of divorce, there can be, the most legal systems, including in this country, I know this because I was a divorce lawyer for a while, have their own requirements in order for divorce to happen. And divorce within the Baha'i faith, you have to follow certain procedures, and sometimes the timing of the two can be challenging. So those are things we negotiate and work around. But the desire has to be there to radiantly acquiesce and then we do our best. I hope that helps.
Thank you so much. Another question asks, the animal nature, the ego, and the desires comes from this material existence and is temporal. Is that correct? The spiritual principles and laws then help us to keep this temporal nature at bay so we can develop our spiritual limbs.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay, another question is asking, what role does the Universal House of Justice in legislating factor into the revolutionary nature of Baha'i law?
Definitely. That's a very important topic. I didn't cover it, but it's absolutely critical. So for the first time in the annals of religion, we have an administrative structure of a faith that has been created by the prophet founder. So it's not made up by a bunch of usually men a couple of hundred years after the prophet founder has passed. And has then been expounded upon and delineated by his successors. So the laws and the institutions are set. These are divine. These are not man-made. I can't emphasize this enough because it is a point of unity. We can't then argue with each other about whether our understanding of this should be A or B. So first of all, we have the laws that are revealed. Baha'u'llah says he's deliberately left big kind of holes in the revelation in order for the Universal House of Justice, which is the supreme legislature and the highest governing body of the faith, to step in accordance with the exigencies of the time, which change as the years roll on, right? Society changes. And the Universal House of Justice can then fill in these lacunae with its laws that it legislates, and it can abrogate and modify its own laws. It cannot abrogate and modify anything revealed by Baha'u'llah and elucidated upon by Abdu'l-Baha and Shoghi Effendi as the authorized interpreters of the Baha'i writings, but in its own sphere, it can legislate. And it's an incredibly revolutionary system because it guarantees the unity of the Baha'i world. So if you and I don't have an understanding of, say, what do I do in the terms of laws of surrogacy? We write to the Universal House of Justice and we ask for guidance, and when that guidance comes, we all obey. And then this whole scheme of obedience that we talked about, obedience to laws, that then all kicks in. We don't quibble, we don't dissent, we don't start creating camps that are for and against. We ask the center of the covenant, the source of unity, we get a response, and we all radiantly acquiesce. And if with the passage of time, the Universal House of Justice in its wisdom decides that now it's time to change that guidance, they will do so. And again, we maintain that spirit of unity and we radiantly acquiesce. So thank you for whoever raised that. It's a very, very, very important topic. It really deserves a whole presentation on its own.
Thank you. Another question asks, how do the Baha'i laws balance the rights and responsibilities of the individual with the needs and well-being of the community?
That is a huge topic. My own understanding, so it is a balancing act, and I'm glad that the questioner put it in terms of a balance. It is one of those areas we again tend to get into these false dichotomies. It's all about my freedom versus it's all about the community. And we see this in various global systems that have been set up, like in the communistic regimes, it's the good of the community, like trumped to such a degree that sometimes you had injustice and unfairness being meted out to individuals whose whose rights basically got trampled upon, or who weren't given their just due for the amount of effort they would put into a system. You know, this idea of uniformity, everybody gets exactly the same, regardless of what they do. You live in exactly the same kind of house, you get exactly the same kind of amount of food. And so there's no motivation, first of all. And if somebody really puts their whole heart and soul into work and goes the extra mile, they're treated exactly the same as someone who is lazy and rests on their laurels, you know. So these imbalances have existed. And in our capitalistic society, we have this inordinate emphasis on the rights of, it's all about me, the rights of the individual. So there is a beautiful balance, and it unpacks itself in many different ways. Really, obeying the Baha'i laws is actually a very good way of ensuring that both are done in balance. Now, we don't live in a Baha'i world, so it's impossible to apply at this point all the Baha'i laws to all things at the same time, including to the societal laws and the personal laws. But we can just do our best and strive for what we can. There's a wonderful, the reason I'm hesitating here is, as I say, it's a big topic, but I would refer you to the wonderful statement put out by the World Center, Individual Rights and Freedoms. It came out a whole bunch of years ago, and it really explores this idea, I think, very well. And of course, now the Universal House of Justice tells us that as we build community, there are three protagonists, right? Not just two. We have the individual, we have our institutions, and we have the community. And all three have to learn to work together and in balance. And so the last thing I'll say on this is that one of the gyms, if you like, or laboratories that which we're getting to experiment with and learn how to balance these three, are the, you know, are the plans given to us by the Universal House of Justice, in which these three protagonists are called upon, first of all, each of them to up their game. So each has to strengthen itself. See, the best analogy here is an orchestra, right? You have different groups of instruments, but all the instruments, so the violins have to learn to play really well together. And then the brass has to play really well together, and so on, and the wind instruments. And then all come together to play as part of the orchestra. So that's, to my mind, what's going on right now in the Baha'i world, this massive experiment and learning process of learning how to develop our individual selves, how to study the writings, understand what God really wants from us, to obey the laws, observe chastity, don't lie, don't be corrupt, don't demonstrate prejudices that may be ingrained in us that we may be unaware of. This is all work I get to do on me, right? And then you have our institutions that are being called upon to higher standards too. And in this current plan given by the Universal House of Justice, like one of the things they're being asked to do is to start creating relationships with institutions and societies, so we can all work and collaborate and stand in solidarity to build a better world. So that's something our institutions get to work on. And then we've got our communities, and we're engaged in our devotionals and instilling morals in our children, and making sure our youth are focused on service and so on. And all three interact on each other. So if you have a person, so say, take me, if I haven't gotten a handle on my backbiting and my lying and my jealousy and all these things that I'm supposed to be working on, my kindness and my prejudice, then I'm not going to do very well. I'm not going to be a very good member of an institution, nor am I going to show up the way I ought to when I'm trying to teach children about morals or the youth about service. Yeah, you see, so all of this is interrelated.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and it asks, how can young Baha'is engage with and understand the revolutionary aspects of Baha'i law, because they seem to face challenges in adhering to them? And what resources or approaches would you recommend to support them in their journey?
Yeah. Yes, this is This is unfortunate. I see it. I've seen it for a number of years. So let me just first share in a spirit of frankness and love. The onus is on us, the parents, to start having conversations about the nature of Baha'i law and distinguishing it just from a set of codes of do's and don'ts. Basically, having this conversation that we had today early. Most parents, from my experience, wait till the kids are 12, 13 to do this. It's too late. The horses left the barn. Once those hormones kick in, their brains are somewhere else at this point. They're looking to their peers for the guidance. They're looking on social media for guidance. And what we're saying to them is sailing over their heads. So this understanding of Baha'i law being something that is the sign of our Creator, something that our Creator is doing out of intense love for us, that it leads to happiness. So you have these conversations with them when they're 8 and 9, that God loves us so much. And so He's given us these things that ensure, that guarantee our happiness, that guarantee our freedom, that guarantee our joy, that guarantee that we will have wonderful relationships with our friends, that we will have happy marriages, all of these. These are conversations we have to start having early, 7, 8, 9. Please, let's not leave it. So once we've left it, then it's very hard. This is not me, this is Abdul Baha. He says it's like straightening a plant. When the plant is young, it's malleable and soft, and you can straighten it if it's starting to go crooked. But once it's hardened, if you move it too far, too fast, you will break it. So at this point, the best thing is deepen. All of the things that I shared with you today, they're all in the writings. All I did was I pulled them from different sources and I tried to weave them together in some logical, hopefully coherent presentation. But feel free, take the slides. I usually don't try putting so much in slides because I think it's a bad idea generally for such detailed PowerPoint presentations, but I deliberately chose to this time because I wanted you to have access to some key quotes that I thought were very illuminating. So share these quotes, arrange spaces, arrange safe spaces for your youth, our youth to come together and share their struggles. We have to put aside judgment, the spirit of judgmentalism. So we have to be very strict with ourselves. So Sovaida has to be very strict with herself, but when Sovaida deals with other friends, she has to be very tolerant and very loving and very understanding and completely non-judgmental. Again, that is a very high standard, but that is what we're called. It is not our business as individuals to sit in judgment on each other, but the trap I see us fall into is we confuse non-judgmentalism with then taking our faith and the laws in a treating them with great laxity. You and I don't have the power to decide that, oh, you know, this law right now is pretty tough, so I would just let it slide. That's not for us to decide. Baha'u'llah's come. Shaykh Effendi addressed this issue. He said, yeah, it's going to be tough. Basically, toughen yourselves. You got to raise yourselves to a new standard. We're trying to pull the whole world up with us. If we're to succumb and say, oh, take it easy, no big pressure, then we're doing the entire world a disservice. Talk about community and individual, right? So we have to do both at the same time. Be loving and completely non-judgmental towards each other, while at the same time upholding the standards of the faith. And that is the role of the institutions. So institutions have to learn to step up even more and do their job even more. We're still local spiritual assemblies. We're not local houses of justice, which is what we're supposed to be. But only when we are mature enough as institutions and have built our muscles will we become local houses of justice and national houses of justice. We're not there yet, and that's okay, because growth is a process. So forgive me, but you clearly can see I feel very strongly on this topic. We can't abdicate our responsibility as adults and parents, and we have to strike the right balance here. being faithful to the laws of Baha'u'llah while also not sitting in judgment of each other as individuals.
Thank you so much. I think that was a great answer to that question. Well, I want to thank you again for your talk and for all these illuminating questions afterwards. Thank you for joining us. As always, your talks are very, thorough and very deepening for me, and I know for others.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
So next week, our speaker is going to be Dr. Sovaida Tahiri, and her topic is Heaven and Hell, A Journey Through Scripture. And again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern Time, so you can invite your friends and family. And if you're new to the Baha'i Faith, or if you'd like to be added to our mailing list, you can fill out the Google form that I will put in the chat below. Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you all next week. Have a great week.